Okay, I don't know if you can hear it, but I am smiling so wide right now. This is a conversation that I am super excited to be bringing to the forefront here today. And it's not because, I'm a closet Bruins fan, I like seeing Boston do well. No, that's like the complete opposite here. I hate the Bruins. But when it comes to this player signing a contract with the Bees and the fact that the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Detroit Red Wings lost out on this bidding war, it's actually really inspiring to me, and especially in the contents of the NHL and this player. So today, we are talking about one of the many signings that went on, and don't worry, we'll make some more videos talking about some of the extra guys that had found themselves onto NHL homes. But in this video, I wanted to talk about Minnesota Golden Gophers forward Jaxon Nelson, because he's just signed a contract with the AHL's Providence Bruins, and he will have himself an entry-level contract with the NHL's Boston Bruins for 2024-2025. Now, part of the reason I am so excited to be talking about this guy in particular is because Jaxon Nelson is actually somebody that I personally have had some history with. Not because I know the guy, not because he is somebody that is in my circle of reality, but because Jaxon Nelson at one point was somebody that I thought was going to be an amazing stud of an NHL player. This is because back in 2015-16, Jaxon Nelson was, without a doubt, the best hockey player in the Minnesota high school scene. Playing for Laverne High, he had 113 points in 25 games played. His point production was so dominant, and a lot of people in the hockey world were kind of just bringing up the idea, hey, does anybody know anything about this 15-year-old American prospect? This post was made 8 years ago, and look, I remember reading this back when it was initially made. He's eligible for the 2018 draft, 15 years old, 6'3", 192. He has scored 223 points in 66 games played. He also had 9 goals in 5 games at the Brick Tournament. This was back in the day. Back in the day, almost a decade ago. And you know, a lot of people were talking about it, like, oh, Jaxon Nelson, he's a big dude. That was always the catch with this guy. He's a big dude, and that's how he's able to go out there and score all these points. And it got to the point where even me, back in like NHL 16, NHL 17, I legitimately put Jaxon Nelson in my video game, and he was one of my mainstay guys. This is my big GM notes spreadsheet that I made for NHL 17. Jaxon Nelson at one point was my first line center on the Canucks, alongside of Sven Baertschi and Brock Besser. You also had Hunter Shinkaruk in there, Bo Horvat, Jared McCann, and a few other guys that were pretty good as well. This is my list for NHL 17. I think it was the same game, if not a different file. I'm not sure. I did have Jaxon Nelson as one of my top tier guys in my video game. And because Nelson wasn't really the guy who stood out in the USHL right after, like, you can see his point production here, 17 points, 58 games, 18 points, 54 games played in his draft eligible years. I was like, okay, this guy's probably not going to become an NHLer, even though he was so good in the Minnesota high school scene. But now, give it 6 years. 5 years in the NCAA, full serving, by the way. He spent an entire half-decade in the collegiate hockey scene, working himself up from 6 points in 33 games as a freshie to 31 points in 39 games as the captain of the Golden Gophers. And now, Jaxon Nelson has become an NHL signee. He is, at the time of recording this audio, 24 years old, 6'4", 220 right-handed guy. He was 6'3", whatever, back when he was like 16 years old. He was so good in the high school league in Minnesota, and that's what stood out to me into making him such a projectable NHL prospect. It's why I had him in my video game and everything. I had to create this guy. And so seeing Jaxon Nelson head over to the Minnesota Golden Gophers, slowly but surely become an effective player and eventually become the captain of the team, this is a guy that I'm super, super excited to be seeing putting himself onto an NHL roster. Now, we had ourselves some rumors earlier today. This is what Jess Myers went out there and tweeted out. We're expecting to learn which NHL team has landed Gophers big man Jaxon Nelson later today. My sources tell me that the Boston Bruins, Detroit Red Wings, and Pittsburgh Penguins were the most interested parties. And eventually, it was revealed that he's going from Dinkytown to Beantown. Congrats, Jaxon Nelson, on signing with the NHL's Boston Bruins. And then you had yourselves the report here from Connor Ryan. The Bruins have signed Minnesota captain Jaxon Nelson to a one-year ELC with an NHL cap hit of $870,000. 6'4", 220, he scored 19 goals and 12 assists for a career high in points this season. But now he will report to Providence on an ATO. The question is right here, potential fourth-line guy, and for next year, probably. So this is a guy who, at this time in his career, sure, while he may not have the number one center potential like some of us, myself included, thought he might have had when he was dominating the Minnesota High School League 8 years ago, he is an NHL project at the moment, and at 24 years old, he may find himself in a spot to potentially break out as a fourth-line guy next year. The Boston Bruins need centers. We've known this for a while. Not saying that Jaxon Nelson is going to be the be-all and end-all, but for what he is right now, he's pretty okay. And a tweet from Elite Prospects goes out there and talks about this. He was the 23rd ranked prospect on the EP Ringside NCAA Free Agent Guide. Bruins fans can read more about him here. I did read this article, by the way, the EP Ringside article that goes over Jaxon Nelson. It pretty much talks about how he's a pretty stable, reliable guy. He can do everything. He's pretty all right defensively. He's a big dude. But when it comes to his individual skills, Elite Prospects ranks him as a 4.5 out of 9 in terms of skating, 5 out of 9 in shooting, 4.5 out of 9 in passing, puck handling. His hockey sense is a 4.0 out of 9, and his physical is a 5.5 out of 9. So realistically, this is the most mid-hockey player that you could have gotten. But realistically, I mean, mid is not necessarily a bad thing, right? It's average. It's right there, baseline, and if you could get decent value from the NHL out of this guy, then it's a pretty good free agency win. I'm personally just really disappointed to hear that the Detroit Red Wings and the Pittsburgh Penguins were also involved here, but they ended up missing out. The Boston Bruins getting this guy, honestly, I feel like it's the best move for him personally, because he'll be going to a system where there's a lot more of a need for center depth. In Detroit, I would have liked to see him there just because, you know, the Wings are my third favorite team, and having one of my childhood franchise mode beasts going over to the Wings 8 years removed, that would have been just incredible. The Pittsburgh Penguins also are trying to find themselves a transition out of the Sidney Crosby, Malkin, Carlsson, Letang era, and younger guys like this, who aren't really like too young but are young enough to still have potential in the future. These are the kinds of guys that I think really bolster up the depth of an NHL roster. So if you're a Boston Bruins fan, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about Jaxon Nelson heading over to your team. He's going over to Providence on an ATO. Next year, he'll suit up on an ELC with the regular Boston Bruins. We'll see if he cracks the team. We'll see if he sticks around. We'll see if he becomes a fourth-line center. But if you're a fan of the Wings or the Penguins, what are your thoughts on your team missing out on Jaxon Nelson, the once superhero-like figure in the Minnesota high school scene in 2015-16. Seriously, if you go back to the league in this time frame, he was the number one guy, and it was kind of crazy because he was only 15. Of course, the high school league has players that are as old as 18 years old, so there was a lot going on here in terms of what Jaxon Nelson was able to accomplish. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about this phenomenal Boston Bruins signee. I hope you enjoyed this video. 99 and bye.